Oh, setting it up. Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion on Air podcast. This podcast is a program of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters Initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Dr. Lisa Greenhill, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer here at the AAVMC. So today we are diving back into the land of the neurospicy to talk specifically about dyslexia from the Google. Take this definition for what it is from the Google. Dyslexia is a learning disability that makes it difficult to read and write. It occurs when the brain has trouble processing written language, which can make it difficult to match letters and sounds. People with dyslexia may have troubles reading, spelling quickly, reading quickly, understanding what they read. Dyslexia is often diagnosed in childhood, but some of us don't find out until we are much older. And then we're like, oh, so that was what was going on the whole time. I myself am dyslexic and was diagnosed in undergrad. And here at my role, in my role at AAVMC, I've tried to be very, very open and transparent about that diagnosis. And periodically, I've even needed some occasional accommodations. It's really been a journey for me. So the reason why we're talking about dyslexia today is because it is one of the most common learning related disabilities. And there is some really interesting literature about how we dyslexics develop coping strategies that help us be successful, and how some of those solutions might actually just be good practice and good pedagogy in general that maybe should be used and implemented in classrooms everywhere, including for you, what I like to call neuronormies. So my wonderful guests today also come to this discussion with their own journeys and their own success strategies. Joining me today are Doctors Sarah Bell and David Neely. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So, as is the custom on our show, we ask guests to self-introduce and tell us all a little bit about you and kind of how you come to this conversation. So, Sarah, we're going to start with you.
Thanks, Lisa. So it's great to be here. It's this evening for me. My name's Sarah Bailey. I'm a veterinarian and I worked in clinical practice for many years. Really enjoyed it, but I got injured, so I actually retrained and went back to university and did computer science as a second degree. Lots of numbers, so that was good for me. And did my PhD in computer science from veterinary medicine, got involved in simulation for learning, then got into academia. That's when I discovered I was dyslexic. And so I've had various roles in academia. I'm now emeritus professor with Bristol University in the UK. And I'm fortunate, as I'm semi-retired, to do lots of consultancy work around the world on things like accreditation, curriculum, educational research, and clinical skills, which is one of the things I really enjoy. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Welcome. Welcome. All right, David, tell us a little bit about you.
I'm David Neely. I grew up in North Carolina, and that's where I went to vet school, was North Carolina State University. Graduated there, did a few years in practice, and then right now I am currently enrolled in a veterinary microbiology residency through UGA. So they have two labs, and the Tifton Diagnostic Lab is the one I'm currently at.
Awesome. Wonderful. So let's dive on in. So Sarah, you retrained and went and did computer science, which wow. Lots of numbers, lots of coding, I'm guessing, lots of stuff. right? So tell us a little bit about kind of how you came to learn about your own dyslexic journey.
So, in retrospect, there were signs of it early on. So I didn't discover till quite late on, formally. But when I was at primary school, when we went from books that just had pictures to books that had words and pictures, I took a step back. And the teacher that we had knew how to help. And she said, you put a piece of paper under each line of text and it will be easier to read. And that was actually before dyslexia was really known, because I think although it was discovered in the 1800s, I think it wasn't sort of formalized in education and learning till the 1970s, probably, and in educate,
Mhm.
going through to schools probably even later than that. So she really helped because then I could read. There weren't all these white lines going down the page that made it difficult. Then I go to secondary school or high school, as you call it, and um, that was different because it's no longer cool to put a piece of paper under each line. So I stopped doing it, and then of course I couldn't read very well. So had a kind of different strategy then, which was to to avoid reading by getting sent out of class. So
Mm.
I spent quite a lot of English classes sitting on the radiator outside the classroom, um, particularly reading out loud. So if I had my own time to read, I was okay. But reading out loud just put me under a lot of pressure and just found that really difficult. I don't know if you, Lisa, and David, that is more difficult for you,
Yeah.
but reading out loud is really, really hard.
Yeah.
So I tried to avoid it by not being in the class when it was my turn to do it. Um, but school was actually okay. And being in practice was okay. There's not too much reading to do in
Mhm.
practice, or not reading you have to do quickly and a lot of it. But when I entered academia, that's when it all started to go wrong, because I had to read a lot and in quite quick time. And it first came to my attention when we were reviewing some multiple choice questions in a group and they put them up on the screen and they scrolled down and I would go, whoa, 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 I'm still up there. And everybody else had got to the bottom of the page. And it kept happening and, annoying everybody else because they had to wait for me. And somebody at the end of that said, are you dyslexic? And I said, no, 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 I'm not dyslexic. What do you mean? She said, I'd go and get tested. And about the same time, I was driving, listening to BBC Radio 4, and there was a program on dyslexia. And it all sort of came together. And so that's when I kind of discovered that it was, yeah, I'd got dyslexia. And that explained a lot of things in retrospect. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm gonna definitely come back to the kind of you listening to the show or podcast or whatever it was on dyslexia because I have a similar kind of, oh, is that what's going on? Let me go get tested situation. So, but before I share, David, tell us a little bit about how you came to learn about being dyslexic.
I was very fortunate that my mother particularly actually had a master's in early childhood education. So she knew pretty much right off the bat that I was different. So right off the bat, she knew that I was going to need more help with things. Definitely have very similar to your other guest as far as experiences in school. They didn't give Fs for, kindergarten and, first and second, but they gave Ns, which stood for
Oh,
needs improvement.
yeah.
And so, you go with science and math and, history and stuff. And I was all, A's and B's, A's and B's. And then you get to reading, writing, spelling, all of that was Ns straight down the board. And so, a little later on, my mom explained to me, the reason why you're having difficulties with these sort of things is because of something, dyslexia, and it's a learning disability or learning difference. And so, but yeah, very similar experiences in school. I did have special education. So I went to out another class when it came to like reading and writing and stuff. But sometimes before I left, they would have like spelling bee type things where everyone stood up and did spelling in the
The
class.
worst.
And I obviously went straight, and if you got the word wrong, you would go sit down, and I went back down. And then probably the worst one was I think in fifth grade, they had the idea of, can you guys still hear me? I'm
Yes.
having, okay. The internet thing came on that's saying connection issues. But in fifth grade, we would read to the kindergartners. And so I had probably just as much difficulty reading those books as the kindergartners did. And, these are kindergarten books. So,
Mhm.
and to be honest, I probably wasn't at grade reading until maybe high school. Even then, I still struggle. Even today, I still struggle with, time. I've figured out that it takes me at least about 2.5 times as long to read something, sometimes 3 times as long to read something as somebody else.
Mhm.
My spelling is atrocious.
Mhm.
I don't even attempt to worry too much about spelling because that's what spell check's for and
There you
Google.
go.
Um, but yeah, so I was fortunate that I knew very early on, and I had very supportive parents that knew I was going to need help, and they were very much advocates for me. And then, so I was very fortunate in that respect.
Well, um, well, thank you. Thanks to both of you for sharing. Yeah, I found out in undergrad. I was a government majors, yay to the humanities folks, but yeah, not the best disciplines for dyslexics because all we do is read. We read and write a lot, a lot, a lot. And I was actually able to compensate for um uh it all through high school apparently, and did very well. And even though, and I loved reading even though it was challenging, I just glazed over some parts. You just gotta, you see it but you don't see it, right? You glaze over some stuff. And then I had an academic advisor that just didn't seem to quite get that I was not a STEM major, but put me in a STEM major chemistry class where I bottomed out. And I was like, but I know this information. And they're like, but you still got a 39 the test. And so the professor let me one day just say, he just said, I'm gonna just leave you in my office and you take as long as you need to get it done. I just kind of want to see something. And I was really fortunate that to be given that chance. And I aced it because I knew the material. But between being given that chance and as kind of a bit of an intervention, and there was a Cosby Show episode where Theo finds out in undergrad that he was failing and having difficulty, and could not explain why. And all of that happened around kind of the same time for me, where I saw that episode. So much like the show you were listening to, Sarah, and then this intervention by the professor, where I was like, oh, well, maybe there's something here. And so I got a referral to be tested, and was able to get accommodations. Of course, that, like, time and a half, much to like, as you mentioned, David, was not necessarily sufficient all the time, because sometimes it takes me even longer to do those things. And so as I've gotten older, for me anyway, it has actually become more challenging than less in some ways. But technology has helped me fill in so many gaps. Yes, spell check is the dyslexic's friend, and Grammarly is a godsend. So, yeah, I mean, it is, we come to these things in so many different ways. And, each of you kind of talked a little bit about the struggle, but can you kind of describe, and David, we'll start with you. What is it like?
Um, I mean, at times it's definitely frustrating, because especially when you're in certain areas, you need to get things done quickly, and efficiently, and those are not necessarily, I can do it efficiently, but quickly, not so much. And so it definitely can be frustrating. For me, a lot of it is with kind of trying to get those sounds and words together, and putting those together. And that does make studying that much more difficult. And reading that much more difficult, and spelling, all those can be very difficult. So I just know that I've just come to accept that that is who I am. And so I do have to plan ahead, and, where someone can, a night or two before, get ready and write that paper. I'm not one of those people. I can't do that. I've got to write it at least a week ahead. Someone else has to read through it and make sure that it's spelled correctly, and makes any kind of sense. And then I have to go back and correct it, and I do this a couple of times. So, you just have to learn
Mm,
that's what it is for you, and you just kind of accept it. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just how you are.
yeah, yeah. Sarah.
Yeah, so I think the thing for me, particularly reading, is the one that I find particularly challenging, and I find it really tiring. So it's interesting you were saying you got, I think I got a 30 to 40% average reading speed when I was evaluated, so about the same as you were both saying. So that means if you're reading a paper or a big document, it's going to take you 3 times longer. So I do find that's a big effort, and I find it exhausting. And if I'm put under a pressure for a timeline, I actually find it very stressful. And for me, one of the worst things is to be sent a large document on a short timeline. And sometimes I've actually physically felt sick when it comes in, because I just don't have enough hours, even if I stayed up all night, probably to read it.
Yeah,
I mean, I've developed reading strategies. I usually only have to read something once. I've got to make yeah, see
got to make
both
it
of you
count.
nodding. You've got to make
Yep.
it count. And that's a really useful strategy, I think. But, I'll never be a journal editor because you have to read so much. I once was a guest editor, and that was a big mistake because they said, oh, you'll get 10 papers and you've got to select 6. And we got something like 30. And I
Oh,
just went, what what am I going to do? So reading's been I think the big thing for me. I mean, writing's not great, but word processor, that just sorts that one out relatively easily, I think, or compared to pre-word processor. And of course, I can remember pre-word processor. Um, yeah, I mean, I think reading out loud, I find that very stressful too. So
yeah,
the strategy for that, if I'm in like chairing a committee or something, is I just delegate that reading out loud to somebody else,
yeah,
um, who
yeah,
can do it because I'm not very good at it. So yeah, I think tiring is my sort of overwhelming sort of feeling about this is when I'm having to deal with it, which is
yeah,
reading long documents, I find it very exhausting.
yeah, yeah. So I'll echo both of those, and so I'll kind of even go so far as let's have a mini, not quizzy, but like if you get a document and it's more than however many pages, Like, what is your initial reaction?
Not good.
So just so that non-dyslexic folks, neuronormies know, like when you send us the 10-page document, we open it and immediately close it because it's too overwhelming. So many words, so many words and so many pages. And even with headings and stuff, they absolutely help, but sometimes I'm literally just overwhelmed. One of the first things I do is I kind of scroll down. I'm like, how many pages is this? How many words is this? Is it organized in any kind of way? That's on the second opening, because the first opening, I'm just like, this is too much. So there's that. Being called on to like read something, there is a pang of anxiety that immediately hits because, I mean, you just know the likelihood of potentially slipping up is high. As it's one thing, David, you talked a little bit about this in terms of what it was like as a kid, but like once you're like in your professional career and you're tripping over A, N, and D, people start
Yeah.
kind of wondering like what's going on, right? Um, and yes, for me, reading, I love reading, and it is exhausting. Like it is really, really exhausting. And so before I get to some of the other questions, do you feel like dyslexia has given you do you have any kind of counterbalance superpowers? That I like to call them superpowers. But do you have any, counterbalance superpowers that, certainly you leverage or, to kind of compensate? And we'll talk about actual strategies in a bit, but any superpowers?
I would say probably the only thing I can think of as a quote unquote superpower is that if you want something done efficiently, a dyslexic person is probably a good one to go to, because we definitely find ways of getting, because we have to know the exact same information that everybody else does.
Yeah.
But we know how to get that information as quickly as we can, because we can't do it the same way. We can't we can't read through the whole thing and do it multiple times. We've got to have ways of getting that information a lot faster, because it'll take us the same amount of time to get the information. So
Yeah.
efficiency, maybe, possibly.
I would say efficiency and retention. For me, the
Yeah.
retention piece, like if I've done my jump through my hoops, then I know I have it. I got it. And it's in there. And I'm really confident that I got it. So I'm good at retaining it once it's in there. That for me is like that memory piece is a superpower. Now, of course, my daughter is like, you don't remember things as well as you think you do. And I'm uh, like, I remember things
Yeah.
better than you think I do. That's some of
Audio
that is
memory,
parenting.
audio memory for me is almost non-existent.
Oh,
But
wow.
reading I am very good at.
And
And watching, I'm more visual. So if I can watch a video or see a picture of something, a
yeah,
drawing of the layout of something, I can do that very quickly. But reading, I can retain it, but it takes me a lot of
yeah.
time. Auditory, not so much.
And so, I mean, this is also a really good time to mention that there are different kinds of dyslexics, that, it manifests in a number of different ways. They're all related, but it manifests in a number of different ways. Like, for me, I am more audio visual, but I can't take notes. Like, I can only focus on one thing. I can only take it in once. And so I have to like focus on, okay, what are they saying? Okay, got it. All right. So, the note taking was just, there's nothing to refer back to. And I didn't like other people's notes. Like I would get them, as a part of my accommodations, but I mean, they were practically Greek because they're not mine and not organized in a way that I would probably organize them. Not that I would have organized them well, but like it wasn't particularly helpful. The note taker accommodation wasn't particularly helpful for me. Sarah.
Yeah, so I guess similar sort of things to what you've mentioned. So I really only have to read something once and I have a very, very good retention of it. But some of that's actually visual. So I can almost bring up the page in my mind. And if I want a particular bit of it that I've highlighted or commented on, if it's PDF, I can read that, um, without seeing the original. Um, I personally don't find audio very very easy. It's interesting you should say that, David. And yet, as a student, because I was pre-PowerPoint and we had to write notes, I was actually very good at synthesizing what I heard and writing very clear notes. And I actually think that's partly how we developed our clinical reasoning, because you had to listen to what was going on and you couldn't write everything. So you had to synthesize as you went. And I like visual. I do find visual a good way for me to learn quickly. And I often think I'm converting reading into visual because I can visualize what I read.
Yeah.
So I think visual is very strong for me. But really, it's very similar to what you're both saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So what strategies then have you kind of developed, picked up along the way? David, we can start with you too, since you kind of have the longest arc here. Kind of what, I mean, and some of these things, you might have been so young that I don't know if I mean, you recognize that they were kind of strategies along the way, but kind of what has helped you?
I would definitely say technology. Technology is probably the number one helpful thing, because it's only getting better and better. I know that I started off with like a speak to write program that
Mm,
didn't work too well for me because it couldn't, especially when I was writing scientific stuff. This was early on,
like
when
dragon
I was
speak.
like, yeah, Dragon Speak, it was it. And so, you say genes and it would say genes like you're wearing versus like the DNA. But so technology definitely is a big thing. There are programs that will read you stuff. So now, for example, because I do a lot of reading now for my residency, if there's a paper I want to read, I'll actually cut and paste it into Word, because the Word one on here, this
Yeah,
place has an actual reading thing.
yeah,
So then I can have it read to me, versus having to read it myself, which is a lot faster. I've learned to skim a good bit. That helps a lot. But yeah, those technology is definitely your friend. Um, but even it has its limits though, because sometimes I misspell things so bad that even spell check in Google doesn't know what I'm trying.
yeah, yeah. As you were talking, I was just thinking about, all those hooked on phonics and back when they used to
Mm.
teach homonyms, like, here are words that are spelled differently. Sarah's like looking like, what is that? But a distinctly American reading approach and that was used like probably in the 70s, the 80s, homonyms and it was like there, and there. And I was like, I don't really know what any of those are. I
Yeah.
try, but there, and there is a problem. Right, context clues. So Sarah, what have you kind of, what are your strategies? How do you approach some of these things?
So similar to David, I think technology was transformative in picking up your spelling and, actually getting early on with things like Word and word processor, you could actually program them to recognize words that you commonly got wrong. So double letters are a challenge for me. Uh, I have no idea why there is one L or two. It just doesn't seem to make any sense and it doesn't really look very different. So, um, one thing I did try once was I wrote a snippet of code to slow down the rate at which presentations ran that I was watching. So basically slowing the world up to my speed. It didn't go down very well with my colleagues who got very frustrated. So that was a very short-term fix. But of course, now with things like YouTube, if there is the
Yeah.
thing that runs at
Playback
the
speed.
bottom that looks like a complete blur, so with that little cog, you can slow it to half speed. So at least you can follow the words. So I think technology has been just such a huge help with reading, with writing, with spelling. Yeah. And it's so much more available now. You can just explore ways to help you, whether it's your spelling, your writing, your reading. Um, and I think I did for writing, particularly the scientific stuff or the research stuff, just learning some grammar rules did help me a little bit. And just, because you've got Grammarly or, generative AI to help now. But early on, I did, in creating the first draft, just learning some simple grammar rules, which I probably should have known, but really embedding them that, if you can't write sentences, just remembering these rules will really help and get you past that black white sheet.
Yeah, yeah. Technology has definitely been transformative for me as well. I had not thought about cutting and pasting articles into Word. So thank you for that.
It,
New.
it can be a little difficult depending upon the article though.
Sure.
But some articles are pretty good at that. And I think nowadays too, you can also get downloads for like
Yeah,
Google that will
yeah,
read for you. So that might be an easier way. But for now, for the one here, I
yeah,
can't download
yeah.
too much. So that's
Yeah.
what it is.
I have found that, a lot of the kind of some of the tools that um have been adopted for folks that are visually impaired have been incredibly helpful for me. Kind of uh just in making things a bit more accessible. So unlike the two of you and slowing down things, I actually speed them up. And part of that just is because I always feel like I have so much content that I'm feeling under the gun to get through it. Not quite chipmunk fast, but at about 1 1/3 speed. And I mean, I listen to an extraordinary amount of podcasts, and I'm always looking for content related to what I'm studying, right? So I'm constantly like, oh, let me Google, like, is there a podcast about this where I can get some background? Is there a video about this that is not a lecture that's 3 hours long? Like, where are the cliff notes for this in a 10-minute or less video that I can put on 1.5 speed and watch in 7 minutes? Like, how can I do that? And I also, even though I struggle with reading, I've gotten to that place where I have to usually have captions on to kind of help me match up the audio where I still need something visual to kind of attach it to besides a face, right? Like, oh, this is the word. Okay, I didn't mess it up. I didn't mess up that word. So I definitely need those things. I am also, I'm really still frustrated that so many academic texts are not accessible in audio versions. And that's been, I guess a thing I'm tilting at windmills for a long time. I mean, and I recognize for a lot of academic publishers, they're like, who would want to listen to this book? And I'm like, there are those of us who that's the most accessible way because I'm not going to get through that book any other way. I'm just not going to get through it. And so audiobooks, podcasts, videos, those things, I'll find articles, to your point, David, I'll find articles that I'm really, really interested in. I can get through the abstract. And then I'm like, okay, so I'm going to go on YouTube and Google this person to see if they've given a talk on this.
Yep.
The other thing that I'm really interested in, because this is one of the first times I've had like to talk to some other professionals. Do you read straight through or do you jump around? Jump around through the text. So,
I pretty much read straight through, unless I have a lot of time restraint. But yeah.
okay. Sarah, you read
Yeah.
through too?
Yeah, I think I suppose I might look at it somewhat strategically to determine whether it's going to be worth reading, a bit like you were alluding to, Lisa, where you look at the headings and the way
Mm-hmm.
it's laid out. But yeah, I do tend to read straight through. I do like it quite sort of linear and logical in the way I read it, because I'm only going to read it once, and I'm going to remember it like that as well, I think. Yeah. Yeah. One thing I was just thinking of,
Yeah.
remind me, when I did enter academia, which has been not the main part of my career, I just remember having this sort of feeling by the end of the day that I didn't have a single word left in me. That was one of my feelings. And so when I had a full-time academic role, I never read a book,
Oh.
or I only never read a book outside of work, because I just had this feeling of there are no words left. I've got to the end of the day and there are no words left.
Well, and then you did a whole nother degree. I just remember after I finished my dissertation for my doctorate, and I told students that I mentor, graduate students that I mentor, like, hey, there's a bit of a down like slope after you finish. One, you've hit a major life milestone, and so there's kind of a denouement kind of there. But also, if you are dyslexic or otherwise kind of maybe neurospicy, there is this fatigue that you've been battling the whole time that is just kind of, at least for me, it was kind of crushing. And I didn't read for pleasure for probably a year and a half after I finished, because I just felt like there's no more words. I don't want to see any more words. I don't want to process any more words. And I still have to go to work, and that's enough words. That's enough words.
I'll read for pleasure rarely, but it's got to be a good book because it's going to be a year probably before I finish it.
Mm, mm, yeah.
Um, and just to kind of go back just
Yeah.
slightly, if you don't mind. So talking about like articles and books and things, there is, or at least there was, the American Library for the Blind. They do have audio material, and they even have certain journals that they have audio of. So that's something that people can potentially check out. I don't know offhand the link of that, but
Not a problem. We
and
will
then
find that. That's really awesome. Thanks for
yeah,
that. So, as we transition from just talking about our own lived experiences, kind of thinking professionally, what kinds of strategies do you think would be useful that and I mean, we've named a number of them, and I'm probably sure that we have ones that we don't even really think about. They're just things that we do, right?
right.
To kind of navigate the day. But what kinds of things do you think that we can do in veterinary medical education to not just support students with dyslexia and related neurodivergence, but really any student? These are just really good, helpful things that we could actually, support success in a broader way. Sarah?
Yeah, I was just trying to think of, so I think probably everybody would benefit from having material in plenty of time. I mean, it is posted in advance, primarily driven by supporting students who need more time to read. But I think having time for that preparation and processing would probably be useful for all students. I also think some of the sort of universal design uh, strategies would be useful for everybody. So they do make a difference for us. I mean, things just as simple as don't use serif fonts like Times New Roman and don't justify it. So you've got bits of white in strange places. Surely that's going to make it easier to read for everybody. I would think. I don't know, but I would imagine if it makes it easier for us, it must make it easier for others. And then if it's easier, you've got more time to think and process, or just finish a little bit earlier. And going back to the textbooks things, I mean, a lot of textbooks don't follow universal design in their fonts, their layouts, etc. That's just not good enough, I'm afraid. You know, they should just do that right. I think for those who for whom it helps with the reading, but I'm sure it would help everybody else. Um, so yeah, I think sort of having giving everybody the sort of time, also the sort of efficient way that we've learned to process and to memorize. I don't know quite how we do it, but I imagine, and probably somebody does. I'm sure somebody's researched this, but you know, if you could do all of that and do it a bit quicker, I mean, that would be great. You know, you're gonna get through stuff quicker, whoever you are.
So we do have a question from the chat, Sarah, about don't justify. I'm assuming you mean like in terms of the
Yeah. So it's
formatting. That's the word I'm
yeah,
looking
so you can adjust to the left, adjust to the right, and
for. Yeah.
then even up the two margins. So
Mhm.
what that does is it creates uneven white spaces between words. And I don't know about the two of you, but for me, the white spaces are problematic because it starts to take my eye down the page, down these sort of rivers of white.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it's quite well known that that can affect dyslexic readers. Yeah, I see
Yeah.
Lisa nodding. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks for that. So, David,
Yes.
what would you like to see in classrooms?
Um,
All videos. No,
I,
it's movie day every day.
yeah, exactly. I'm just making sure that material is presented in multiple ways, I think will be helpful. So much of what we get is just words.
Mhm.
But I think not just dyslexic people, but a lot of people don't learn just from words.
Yeah.
And so having audiovisual material as well as graphics definitely would help.
Yeah. Yeah. Very helpful. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot that we can do. I mean, I will say one of my biggest pet peeves is slide decks and the crazy things that people do with slides. Like, right. And I was abroad recently and was a major keynote speaker. And these were some of the worst slides I'd ever seen in my but I just was like, yeah, I'm just not going to even look at the screen anymore because this person has violated every possible accessibility rule about creating slides. Like, there's no white space, things are justified weird. There's like graphs or tables of data. I mean, there's 4,000 people in this auditorium. Why is there a table with more than like, I don't know, three rows? Like it's just not I was like, this is completely inaccessible. This presentation that this person spent a lot of time on and was probably like me harassed to get it in on time, worked really hard on this, and it's one of the worst things that I've seen in a really, really long time. Right. And so, what are some of the things that kind of help you when looking at presentations? And then I also have a question on what do you think about the dyslexia fonts?
I've only seen the dyslexic fonts one time, because there was something that said, oh, you want to try the dyslexic fonts. I didn't particularly like it. I thought it was harder to read than the regular font, so that's what I have to say on that for me at least. Um,
Yeah. So what do you think about presentations? What is helpful for you?
I do the one thing I don't like about the PowerPoints is when because oftentimes people will end up adding because I would get the PowerPoints sent to me, but people would add things in that weren't in my slides, or they would have like a picture that would, in the lecture, they talk and then a picture would pop up and then they go on to the next slide. Well, when you send those slides, so oftentimes to someone as a saved file, that picture is up there and you can't see the words that were behind it. So that's definitely some of the things that, and then like changing the orders of the slides, because again, I like to follow along very logical because that helps a lot.
Mhm.
So those are some of the things I guess for PowerPoints
Yeah.
to be aware of.
Yeah. How about you, Sarah?
Yeah, I think because my first education was pre-PowerPoint, um, and I just, I think less is more, mixing it up with regard to good quality diagrams and images, but slide after slide after slide of lots of text. I mean, PowerPoint's not really the best way to present that anyway, I don't think. But do you really need all that information? And is, lots of words the best way to present it? Are you going to get a stronger message from a diagram, a graph, an image? Um, yeah, lots and lots of PowerPoint slides. Please just try and think how you could do less, how you could introduce active learning strategies, at key points. Um, yeah, and don't I really can't stand serif fonts, the ones with the ticks on them.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but
Sans
just
serifs
make it so
only.
much more difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, sans serif fonts only. Like you, David, I don't particularly care for the dyslexia fonts. They're giving Comic Sans to me. Like they look like Comic Sans to me, and I'm just like, I can't deal with this because some letters have wider or thicker elements to them, and I guess it's for some of us that helps the word pop more or something, but for me, yeah, it's giving Comic Sans, and I'm like, I can't deal with that. For me, I like a lot of white space. Um, like use the bullets. The thing that I in the last probably definitely 5 to 7 years, I use a lot more. Are they called GIFs or GIFs? I don't know. This is showing my age. So like you DVM students, you Gen Z, Gen Alphas, don't
Yes.
come for me in the comments. Whatever they are. But I use a lot of those now to convey emotion, to convey additional messages. And it's just a little bit more active, I guess, to kind of bring people along. David, you made me realize that for those times when I'm just using an image, I still probably need to put the content down in the notes section in case I'm going to send those around, because otherwise then it's just a picture and you have a gap in information that is not particularly useful when you send your slides around. But yeah, and also less is more. And so yeah, I do think that we also have to, like, for those of us that are dyslexic, that do present a lot. Like I know for me, even when I'm giving a presentation, there are like, I'm only looking at keywords. Like I have a list of keywords, even sometimes on my presenter screen. Like, here's a keyword, trigger, a trigger, a trigger, a trigger, to just kind of keep me focused. And kind of hitting the marks. Otherwise, I am for another show, am also ADHD, and I'm sometimes like squirrel. That has happened also in a presentation where I was like, I don't even know what I was talking about just now from the stage, because I got distracted. But yeah, it's a challenge. So we do have another question from the chat. How does imposter syndrome? Do we have imposter syndrome, and how does that affect us? Anybody want to weigh in, David?
I mean, I think all of us have, especially at least in the veterinary field, I think most of us have some form of imposter syndrome. But for me, it's different. Um, because even to this day, I cannot pronounce a lot of the drug names, a lot of the disease names. Some of them I can't pronounce. They're difficult enough for regular people, but for me, it's even worse. And that definitely kind of puts me at if I'm talking to someone, I'm like, okay. And for me, what I've done is I've used it when I was in clinics. I kind of used it a little bit to help connect a little bit with the people, because I'm like, look, these words are difficult for me too, and I'm a vet. So, and you can kind of use that to kind of bridge that gap, make it a little bit of a joke, sort of, and kind of help. And they're like, okay, this person is not just, some academic from Mount High that's coming to tell me about my dog. They're a person too. So I try and use that. But yeah, it definitely, when you're talking with colleagues or someone who's, comes in from an academic background, it does make you feel a little bit of imposter syndrome, because you're like, I can't pronounce these words like what I should be able to.
I'm gonna come back to that, but Sarah, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it's mostly been around reading, you know, not being able to keep up with colleagues and not feeling sometimes that I can't do something because I can't possibly read everything. And also just around not reading outside of work too, admitting that you don't when everybody else does. So mine's been very focused around reading, I think. Uh, the Probably partly because I got into computing as well, that helped. Numbers is much more my thing than so. Although coding is difficult, so I had a little bit of imposter syndrome around that, but that was more because coding is difficult, I think, than to do with dyslexia. Yeah.
So, David, you brought up something with, the complicated words for conditions and diseases and drugs, and it literally just dawned on me. Like I'm not a veterinarian, for folks that don't know. I'm not a veterinarian, but I typically avoid like all of that like the plague, because I know I'm gonna get stumbled on the first syllable. It's all downhill from here, right? And yet I'm an advocate of like, hey, we're gonna learn how to say people's names. We can learn these things because we do tough things and we say all of these really complicated medical terms. Not me, but us.
Right.
like, like as in y'all. But I've also thought about the ways in which we teach this, and there is this phenomenon that I've complained about within medicine and I think I will say that human medicine does a better job of this, but in medicine in general, we get so caught up in learning the proper terminology for stuff that then that becomes the language that is always used, and it makes it really inaccessible for clients. Right. So I can't tell you how many times, I have heard someone and they're like, oh my goodness, somebody has a blah, 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 blastoma. And I'm like, I know from TV that that's cancer.
Yeah.
Like, can you just say cancer? Like, and I mean, and if it's cancer of the foot, you can just say foot. Like you don't
Right.
have to. We can actually I think about oftentimes when I'm submitting an IRB for a research paper, I have to give a reading score to the content that I'm submitting. Like, is this at a third grade reading level so that it's accessible to more people? And I think that sometimes we don't do the best job in health professions of saying, hey, here is this language, this medical language, but this is also what you probably need to use in the clinic with a client, with a layperson, to make it more accessible. But also, it becomes more accessible for those of us with dyslexia and other neurodivergent conditions as well. Because I mean, I look at some of these things and I'm like, I'm tapped out. Is it in the leg? Like, is it a knee? Like, what is it? So that I actually can follow along, but the complexity of some of these words is so off-putting to me that I won't even, there are times when I will admit here, I don't even try it. I don't even try it. I'm like, let me
Yeah,
find
they're
a part, let me find a syllable that I recognize. Okay, that must be cancer.
yeah, and as
Think
far as trying to, oh, sorry,
Go
as
ahead.
far as trying to learn these difficult words for me, again, I'm more of a visual person. So I would look at a term or, a drug or something and look at parts of it and kind of almost visualize a certain thing for this. And that way I can at least recognize it when I see it. I may not be able to pronounce it, but I can recognize it when I see it. And I can at least get it close enough in Google that Google can tell me the drug, the spelling of it. Um, but yeah, that's definitely kind of how I dealt with some of those longer words. And trying to turn that more into a visual thing and relate that to rather than focusing so much on the pronunciation. And then yeah, I'm bad with names. I'm terrible with names. I had to actually present awards to a group here recently, and I just butchered all of their names, and there was no coming back from that. It was bad. I think I would prefer to give a speech than call out people's names. It's just not something I'm good with. But yeah, I will watch lectures just to learn the words
Mm,
and type them into like the audio things. Like
mm,
I was saying, the word that has the reading, I'll type them in there and I'll just listen to it like 15, 20, 30 times to kind of get those. That's the only way I've figured out to really kind of get the pronunciations of things.
yeah. Sarah?
so. There's a word that I've never really got my head round, and that's veterinary, which is kind of key.
Yeah.
It
I misspell
just
that every now and then.
Yeah. Veterinary is a problem.
It's kind of an
it
important
just
one for us.
it
Yeah,
is, and
it
it's
is.
really difficult. I still can't say it.
Yeah,
Yeah, no.
veterinary. Like, yes, I've had to over the years had to really, really practice because there's a couple of little letters in there that just kind of glaze right on over. And it's very easy to become a vegetarian instead of veterinary. So with
But
that, as we wrap up, what is one thing that you want your colleagues to know about, for faculty or employers? What is one thing that, they can make things that they can do to make things not just easier for dyslexics, but ultimately more accessible to everyone? Sarah.
So, yeah, so I think I would recommend working with a dyslexic colleague in when you're, preparing presentations, when you're thinking about what strategies they use that might help others, particularly things like exam questions. I think it really helps to have a dyslexic in the group so that you're not using unnecessary or overly complicated words or overly long scenarios when you just don't need to. So I think involving a dyslexic colleague in your conversations, in your preparation of educational material at all stages and levels, I think that would be my recommendation.
Great. Awesome. David.
Kind of like I said, keeping in mind that everybody learns in a different way and trying to present things in different manners. And then as far as this is more for, because going back to the imposter syndrome, at least for me, I've kind of owned it that I'm dyslexic. It's not something that I hide. Yeah, there are times when I don't bring it up because I don't feel it's needed to be, but in situations, most of my colleagues know that I'm dyslexic. My professors knew I was dyslexic. Um, and I just admitted, I'm dyslexic, these are the things that I'm going to have difficulties with. I'm not going to be pronouncing these things correctly. I'm not going to be spelling them correctly, and just kind of, I think that's kind of the hardest part is just kind of accepting that of yourself and really just kind of saying, you know what, that's how it is. I own it. And I've just got to kind of adapt and go on and and just let people know, these are what's going to happen with me.
So, my parting words will be if you are a slide deck person, get on over to somebody's office of accessibility and have somebody tell you the truth about your presentation. Hard truths, but we can do hard things. That's number one. Number two, whenever we can simplify language, do that. If really the most important thing is to see spot run, we don't need all the extras.
Yeah.
We don't need all the extras. It makes it harder for everybody to sift through all of the extras. And then, yeah, I mean, just as much plain language as possible. It's important for people to know proper terminology. Totally, totally support that. But in terms of more holistic accessibility, like don't have I don't want to go to the I don't want to take my dog to the clinic and they're using what I call highfalutin $1 million words. And because also that creates a power differential too. That's a whole nother podcast, but that creates a power differential as well. And we want people to feel empowered and that we're at the same kind of level, right? And so part of that whole kind of modifying language is really helpful for doing that. So those are my parting words. And don't make us say the names of people. Like we're not the people to give the award.
Don't make
Don't
us
don't
read
do
out
it.
loud.
We are not the people to present the award for you. Like as you said that, David, I had this moment of thinking, like, what would it be like to call all of the names at a graduation? And I had a mini panic attack on the end.
Literally, I will do an hour speech before I call people's names out. I do not like it. That gets my palms sweating. That gets my heart racing more probably than I don't like giving speeches, but
But
that
you'll do
that
that.
that gives me more. That's worse than a speech to me.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
going to call in sick that day, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't be there. Absenteeism by dyslexics. With that, I'll bring our discussion today to a close. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, David, so much for joining me today. This has been another episode of AAVMC's Diversity and Inclusion on Air. Be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app of choice. We should be on all of them, and we will see you soon. Thank you.